By sunrise, the desert stretched like a wound across the horizon. The wind carried dust, heat, and something else, an unease you could taste. A convoy of black SUVs cut through the emptiness. Engines snarled. The lights inside flickered, revealing faces set like stone. No one spoke. Not yet. Then, explosions of sirens. Voices shouting orders into radios. A single man stepped forward. His eyes were hidden behind reflective shades. The papers in his hand trembled, not from wind, but from something heavier. "You can't do this," someone whispered. But the real story hadn't even started. By mid-morning, cell phones lit up the world like a forest fire. Video clips circulated before anyone could process them. A wall of officials, shouting. A crowd of protesters, waving banners, their mouths open in fury. And in the middle, one man, pointing, yelling, commanding. He was larger than life, and yet, somehow, fragile. The border town had never seen this before. Fences weren't just fences anymore. They were symbols. Concrete blocks weren't just barriers, they were declarations. The air smelled of fear and gasoline. Smoke curled into the sky. People screamed. Someone dropped their child. And still, no one knew why. Inside the command SUV, a hand tapped nervously on the dashboard. A pen clicked, a notebook opened. A single note scrawled in urgency. Contain it. Control it. No leaks. Outside, the chaos escalated. Reporters ran, cameras shaking. A man on a megaphone tried to calm the crowd. "Listen to me. Listen." But their voices were drowned by shouting. Something was breaking, but what, exactly? The real danger wasn't the fire, the shouting, or even the border itself. It was something more insidious. By noon, the footage had gone viral. Every screen in every diner, every high-rise office, every late-night TV studio, flickered with the same images. A nation was watching. And a nation was wondering. How did it get this far, this fast? Inside one darkened room, advisors whispered, heads bowed. Maps were strewn across tables. Red markers scribbled like blood. Decisions were being made, decisions that would ripple far beyond the desert, beyond the fences, beyond the moment itself. And yet, the man at the center, he appeared calm. Almost too calm. You could see it in the tilt of his head, the way his eyes scanned the crowd, calculating. He was a force. But also, a puzzle. And you knew, watching, that the puzzle was about to shatter. Outside, a young girl clutched her mother's hand, eyes wide. "You see that man?" she asked. Her mother shook her head, whispering words she didn't really believe. But the girl's gaze didn't leave the figure. There was recognition there. Or fear. Or both. "You've seen this before. You felt this once, didn't you?" The sirens died down, but the tension did not. Smoke lingered. Shouts became whispers. The desert, once empty, now held 1,000 stories. And then, from somewhere unseen, a single voice over a radio. "They're recording everything. Every step. Every word." A door clicked shut. The convoy moved again, slow and deliberate. No one spoke. The wind carried the smell of burning tires. The heat pressed against skin, sticky, relentless. And above it all, the sky was too bright. This was the moment everyone would remember. Not because of what was done, but because of what was revealed. There was one detail everyone missed. A small envelope, tucked into a pocket of a man who thought no one was watching. Inside, a secret. A directive. A truth that would fracture the narrative everyone believed. The cameras didn't catch it. Reporters didn't see it. Even the officials in the command center, heads bowed over maps and red markers, didn't notice. But this detail, it was everything. And just like that, by late afternoon, the story had begun to write itself. Footage, tweets, posts, an unrelenting stream of outrage, questions, confusion. Everyone wanted answers. No one had them. At a diner miles away, an old man sipped coffee. He watched the news, shaking his head. Same story. Different day, he muttered. But even he, with decades of memory behind him, felt the tremor of something unprecedented. And here's the part almost no one saw. It wasn't just the border, the order, or even the chaos. It was the system itself, bending under pressure. The rules were changing. The lines between order and disorder, power and responsibility, had blurred. And no one could predict where they would settle. The convoy reached its destination. Doors opened. The man stepped out. Faces turned. Cameras rolled. A crowd surged. And still, the envelope waited, silent, unassuming, invisible. This was more than politics. More than headlines. More than anger and fear. This was about control. About perception. About the quiet machinery that shapes what we see, what we believe, and what we fear. By sunset, the lights in the town dimmed. Smoke still rose, curling into a blood-orange sky. The chaos had paused. But tension lingered. The story wasn't over. It had only begun. But the real story hadn't even started. The desert was silent again by nightfall. Not peaceful, just silent. That strange, heavy kind of silence that lingers after something important, but unfinished. People drove home. Lights in diners flickered out. Reporters packed up their gear, still whispering theories. But the man at the center of it all? He had already left the dust and smoke behind. And to understand what came next, you need to understand where he came from. Because none of this began at the border. It began decades earlier. With a boy staring through a fogged-up window, watching a world he didn't feel part of. You know this feeling. He grew up in a quiet town. The kind with one diner, one gas station, one high school football team everyone pretended to care about. His father wasn't home much. Deals, meetings, promises, always more promises. His mother tried to hide her exhaustion behind a smile that never fully reached her eyes. And the boy? He sat alone in his room, watching late-night TV when he was supposed to sleep. News anchors. Documentaries. Political rallies. He didn't understand everything, but he understood one thing. Power could shape the world. And those who wielded it, rarely told the whole truth. Sometimes he'd sneak into the garage where his father kept stacks of old newspapers. He'd flip through headlines like artifacts from another century. Corruption. Scandal. Outrage. The same themes, repeating like a broken record. He wondered why no one ever seemed surprised. Why the world kept spinning. Even when the truth was right there, printed in ink for everyone to see. But something in him was shifting. Every American figure in a story like this has a scar. Something small. Something quiet. Something that doesn't matter to the world, but changes everything for them. His came on a cold November morning when he was 12. He overheard an argument between his parents. Voices cracking, words sharp enough to cut. His father said something he never forgot. People don't want the truth. They want the version that makes them feel safe. And in that moment, something crystallized inside the boy. A belief. A fear. A contradiction so deep it would shape every decision he'd make as an adult. He wanted to expose the truth. But he also wanted control. You felt this once, didn't you? That tug of war inside you between honesty and protection. Between revealing and hiding. Between chaos and comfort. He left home as soon as he could. Packed a single suitcase. Took a bus down a long highway stretching toward a future that felt both promising and dangerous. The bus hummed. Streetlights flickered through the windows. A diner sign buzzed as they passed. He studied faces, the tired mother, the man clutching a briefcase, the kid staring out the window just like he used to. He didn't know it then. But this was the start of everything. College wasn't glamorous. He wasn't charming. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the kind of person anyone remembered after the first conversation. But he was watching. Always watching. People. Power. Narratives. How a single rumor could shape a room. How a single secret could shift a hierarchy. How a single decision could fracture a community. At night, he'd sit on his dorm bed, watching grainy videos of border disputes, immigration hearings, congressional speeches. Not because he was passionate. But because he sensed something there. A pressure point in the American psyche. A fault line. A crack quietly spreading. There was one professor. Older, sharp-eyed, restless. Who noticed the boy's intensity. You don't watch to learn, the professor said once. You watch to understand motive. That comment changed him. Not because it was true. But because it was the first time anyone had seen it. Seen him. The professor kept a drawer full of declassified documents. Border decisions. Emergency orders. Internal memos from decades past. Not secrets, exactly. Just forgotten truths. One night, after class, the professor handed him a photocopy of an old directive. A border enforcement policy never enacted. Never explained. Never publicly acknowledged. Why show me this? He asked. The professor leaned back, eyes heavy. Because you're going to need it one day. And because people like you, the ones who can see the fault lines, are the ones who eventually try to pull them apart. He didn't understand the weight of those words. Not yet. But they dug into him, quiet and deep. But he didn't know what was coming. He graduated. Moved to a city where skyscrapers blocked out the sky. The kind of city where everyone talked fast, walked fast, and thought they understood everything. He worked odd jobs. Consulting. Logistics. Communications. Nothing glamorous. But he watched. Always watched. He saw how policy wasn't shaped in conference rooms. But in back hallways, late-night calls, whispered compromises. And every year, the border issue grew hotter. Sharper. More tangled. He knew how the public saw it. He knew how the media framed it. But he also saw something else. The machinery beneath it all. The system. The incentives. The hidden levers. And slowly, year by year, he decided he would pull one of those levers himself someday. Not for fame. Not for chaos. Not for power alone. But because he believed the truth. His truth was being buried under noise. Late one night, sitting alone in a small apartment overlooking a highway, he watched a convoy of patrol vehicles race past. Lights flashing. Radios crackling. Something urgent. He leaned forward, forehead pressing the cold glass. For a split second, he felt the same sensation he would feel years later at the border. That the story unfolding in front of him wasn't the real story at all. There was a deeper logic. A hidden architecture. A reason behind every siren, every order, every clash. He whispered to himself, words he never told anyone else. One day, I'll expose it. One day, someone will have to. But here's the paradox. He didn't know then that he would become part of the very system he wanted to reveal. He worked odd jobs. Consulting. Logistics. Communications. Nothing glamorous. But he watched. Always watched. He saw how policy wasn't shaped in conference rooms, but in back hallways, late-night calls, whispered compromises. And every year, the border issue grew hotter. Sharper. More tangled. He knew how the public saw it. He knew how the media framed it. But he also saw something else. The machinery beneath it all. The system. The incentives. The hidden levers. And slowly, year by year, he decided he would pull one of those levers himself someday. Not for fame. Not for chaos. Not for power alone. But because he believed the truth. His truth was being buried under noise. Late one night, sitting alone in a small apartment overlooking a highway, he watched a convoy of patrol vehicles race past. Lights flashing. Radios crackling. Something urgent. He leaned forward, forehead pressing the cold glass. For a split second, he felt the same sensation he would feel years later at the border. That the story unfolding in front of him wasn't the real story at all. There was a deeper logic. A hidden architecture. A reason behind every siren, every order, every clash. He whispered to himself, words he never told anyone else. One day, I'll expose it. One day, someone will have to. But here's the paradox. He didn't know then that he would become part of the very system he wanted to reveal. He believed he was exposing something. Revealing something. Correcting something. But what he didn't realize, what almost no one realized, was that the moment he stepped onto that desert road, the system wasn't watching him. It was waiting for him. The desert never truly sleeps. Even in the dark, something hums beneath the surface. A kind of restless energy, waiting to break. And on the morning after the border clash, it finally did. At first, the reports looked normal. A few file summaries. A handful of incident logs. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. But a single detail fractured everything. A timestamp. Misaligned by 13 minutes. 13 minutes unaccounted for. During the exact moment when the shouting turned violent. When the cameras shook. When the crowd panicked. 13 minutes that didn't appear in any official briefing. Not in the radio logs. Not in the surveillance feeds. Not in the patrol reports. It was as if reality had skipped a beat. And no one could explain why. You've seen this before. That moment when a story stops adding up. And your instincts whisper that something is wrong. In an office lit by flickering fluorescent panels. A group of officials sat around a long table. You could smell the tension. Stale coffee, burnt nerves, worry hidden behind straightened ties. They went through the reports line by line. Everything looked tidy. Too tidy. Neatly typed paragraphs. Clean bullet points. Every detail accounted for. Except those 13 minutes. Someone cleared their throat. We should ignore that for now. Ignore. Ignore evidence. Ignore a blank space in the middle of a firestorm. But that's how systems behave when pressure hits. Not with transparency. But with selective blindness. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The real danger wasn't change. It was who controlled the definition of normal. A silence settled. Heavy. Unspoken. Complicit. Everyone at that table felt the crack. But they pretended not to. Pretending keeps careers intact. Outside, the public wasn't pretending. They were screaming. Posting. Sharing. Demanding. Clips went viral that no one in the room wanted to acknowledge. A man yelling orders that weren't in the official transcript. An officer stepping out of formation. A woman being pulled back from the fence by someone not wearing a uniform. And in one blurry 20-second clip. The central figure. Jaw clenched. Eyes fixed on something off camera. Murmuring a sentence that lip readers would spend days debating. What he said next changed everything. But no one knew exactly what it was. Not yet. Microhooks ricocheted across the internet. What really happened? Why is this missing? Who edited this footage? 1,000 theories. 1,000 arguments. 1,000 fractures in the narrative. Screens lit up. Voices sharpened. No one agreed on what was real anymore. He sat alone in a secure office. The envelope still tucked into his suit pocket. He hadn't opened it since the border clash. Didn't need to. He already knew what it said. The directive wasn't new. Not to him. He recognized the phrasing. The logic. The worldview. He'd seen something like it once. In the professor's drawer. Years earlier. A policy designed to test boundaries. Not physical borders. Psychological ones. And the question now wasn't whether the directive was legal. Or ethical. Or justified. The real question was. Who leaked it? Because someone had. He could feel it. A whisper in the air. A shift in posture from the men around him. A tightening of tone in every conversation. Someone inside the system wanted the clash. Someone wanted outrage. Someone wanted the narrative to break. And he wasn't sure if he was the target. Or the instrument. You know this feeling. When you realize you're not steering the moment. The moment is steering you. Late afternoon. A knock at the door. Soft, but deliberate. A kind of knock that says. I already know what you're hiding. A woman entered. Calm, stern, eyes sharp enough to slice through lies. She didn't sit. Didn't offer a greeting. Just asked one question. Where were you during those 13 minutes? His stomach tightened. Not because he feared the question. But because it confirmed his suspicion. Someone inside the system was counting. Measuring. Waiting. I was where I needed to be, he replied. A non-answer. A safe answer. A dangerous answer. Her eyes narrowed. You understand the optics. This can't look like what it already looks like. Then she left. Door closing with a quiet click. The kind that echoes louder than a slam. Minutes later, every screen in the country lit up. A leaked memo. Not the directive in his pocket. Something worse. A message, unattributed, and signed. Claiming he had ordered the clash. Claiming he had staged the confrontation. Claiming he had wanted the chaos. Absolute fiction. Perfectly timed. Utterly explosive. The networks ran with it. Talk shows erupted. Commentators dissected every second of border footage. People didn't want facts. They wanted a story. And the story was writing itself. He planned this. He orchestrated it. He likes the attention. He crossed a line. But the truth sat quietly in his pocket. Unopened. Untouched. Unavoidable. By evening, he knew the rules had changed. Whatever system he thought he understood. It wasn't playing by the old playbook anymore. Disruption wasn't coming. It had already arrived. Contradiction wasn't forming. It had taken shape. Moral pressure wasn't building. It was crushing down on everyone involved. And then. Just when he thought the day couldn't fracture any further. A second memo leaked. Not accusing him. Not defending him. Just revealing something no one expected. Those 13 minutes weren't missing. They were deleted. Not lost. Not corrupted. Deleted. Intentionally. Precisely. Surgically. Which meant someone inside the system wanted them gone. Not to protect him. Not to shield the public. But to reshape the narrative entirely. And here's the sting. What he didn't remember doing wasn't the problem. It was what someone else remembered for him. The tension reached its breaking point. Not because of the chaos at the border. Not because of the leaked memos. Not because of the missing footage. But because a voice inside him whispered something he didn't want to admit. You might be the only person who can stop this. And you might be the one who started it. Contradiction. Moral weight. Internal collapse. The pressure was no longer political. It was existential. The border clash wasn't the story anymore. He wasn't the story anymore. The missing 13 minutes weren't the story anymore. The story was the system. The machine. The invisible architecture shaping every narrative. Every reaction. Every outrage. And he finally realized. The system wasn't cracked. It was designed this way. The truth didn't break them. Their denial did. The night after the memos leaked. The city felt wrong. Too still. Too synchronized. Like everyone was holding their breath. Waiting for a truth no one wanted to hear. But everyone sensed was coming. And in an office sealed by reinforced glass and cold fluorescent light. The man at the center of it all finally opened the envelope. Not out of curiosity. Not out of fear. But because he knew the moment he did. There was no going back. The paper crackled. His fingers hesitated. A single breath. Then. He unfolded it. And here's the part almost no one saw. It wasn't a policy memo. Not exactly. It wasn't an order. Not officially. And it definitely wasn't new. It was a blueprint. A framework. A conceptual design for a system of border response. So precise. So calculated. So meticulously engineered. That calling it policy would be an insult. At the top, stamped faintly in faded ink. Project Meridian, Behavioral Containment Protocols. You know this feeling. The cold rush. The drop in your gut. The realization that someone has been planning something. Long before anyone else noticed it happening. What they called freedom. Was quiet dependency. What they called control. Was curated chaos. What they called border security. Was psychological engineering. He stared at the text. Every sentence tightening around his ribs. This wasn't written last week. Not last year. It predated him. Predated the administration. Predated the current crisis. Meaning the border clash. The outrage. The chaos. The missing 13 minutes. None of it was spontaneous. None of it was accidental. None of it was new. It was the latest ripple. Of a system running beneath the surface. For decades. The document outlined 3 phases. Simple words. Terrifying implications. Phase 1, exposure. Trigger a public confrontation. Not large enough to be catastrophic. Large enough to force attention. Large enough to divide opinion. Phase 2, escalation control. Release incomplete information. Allow contradictions to surface. Nurture confusion. Let people believe they are uncovering truth. When in reality, they are being fed carefully curated fragments. Phase 3, behavioral momentum. Let outrage do the rest. Public reaction becomes the engine. Media amplifies it. Officials scramble to manage it. The system steps back. And lets the narrative spiral. Exactly where it was designed to go. This wasn't about borders. This wasn't about policy. This wasn't even about him. It was about shaping collective behavior. Through tension, conflict, and curated uncertainty. A self-sustaining cycle. A machine disguised as chaos. You've asked this question too. Why does every controversy feel the same? Why does every crisis follow the same emotional rhythm? Why does every unexpected event unfold like a rerun we've somehow seen before? Because the outline, the one he held trembling in his hands, wasn't a plan. It was a pattern. He flipped to the back of the document. A list. Names blacked out. Dates missing. Several pages removed entirely. But one detail wasn't hidden. A seal. Not federal. Not military. Not intelligence. A private emblem. A consortium logo from decades earlier. Dissolved publicly. Forgotten politically. But clearly operational in the shadows. He whispered the words printed beneath it. Continuity of Stability Initiative. He'd read about it once. Buried in a book on obscure American policy experiments. A short-lived task force formed during a crisis. Quietly funded. Quietly authorized. Quietly erased. But now he had proof it never dissolved. It simply moved underground. And the border directive? The one that sparked the clash. The outrage. The missing footage. The suspicion surrounding him. It was crafted by the same group. That had been manipulating tension. Long before anyone called it news. And suddenly, the 13 missing minutes made perfect sense. They weren't lost. They weren't deleted. They were realigned. Repositioned. Replaced. Edited to protect something far more dangerous than a political figure. Or a border policy. They were protecting the system itself. A knock at his door. Short. Sharp. Unmistakable. A technician entered silently. Holding a tablet trembling in his hands. I shouldn't have found this. The technician whispered. And I definitely shouldn't show it to you. He pressed play. Static. Blur. Then clarity. Not perfect. But undeniable. Camera angle. Overhead drone. Timestamp. Those 13 missing minutes. What it showed wasn't an attack. Wasn't an order. Wasn't a clash. It was a meeting. He stood facing two individuals. Not wearing uniforms. Not part of any official agency. Not listed on any roster. Their faces deliberately obscured by the drone's compromised feed. But their posture. Commanding. Unhurried. Certain. They handed him something. A second envelope. Thicker. Heavier. Unopened. He watched himself take it. Watched himself nod. Watched himself pocket it. The same pocket he had reached into before the clash. His breath caught. He didn't remember this. Not because he forgot. But because someone had overwritten the record of the moment. In his own mind. You felt this once, didn't you? That sudden realization. That your memory might not be the whole story. He turned to the technician. What is this? The technician swallowed hard. I think. A pause. A tremor. I think you weren't supposed to see it. Because you weren't supposed to remember it. A chill ran up his spine. The professor's words echoed back to him. From that old college office. Those dusty drawers of classified files. The people who can see the fault lines. Are the same ones they try to recruit. Recruit. Manipulate. Control. Rewrite. And suddenly the entire border clash made sense. Not as a crisis. Not as a misstep. But as a trigger. A test. A calibration. A ritual in the machinery of influence. And he wasn't the orchestrator. He wasn't the pawn. He wasn't the victim. He was the variable. The one factor the system couldn't fully predict. The one element the architects had to shape manually. And they had been shaping him. For years. He sank into a chair. The envelope still open on his desk. The video still looping on the tablet. The image of himself receiving orders. From shadows he didn't recognize. Everything felt warped. Tilting. Closing in. What they called oversight was selective amnesia. What they called national interest was behavioral maintenance. What they called patriotism was emotional choreography. He whispered. Barely audible. Barely breathing. How much of me did they design? And in that moment, he wasn't powerful. He wasn't central. He wasn't the figure on every screen. He was human. Afraid. Awake. And for the first time, he understood the cost of knowing the truth. In a system built on curated forgetting. The technician stepped closer, voice trembling. There's something else. A message embedded in the deleted frames. Encrypted. Hidden. He tapped the screen. A phrase appeared. Glitching. Distorted. But unmistakable. This was only phase 1. He froze. Breath stopped. Heart hammered. The border clash wasn't the climax. It wasn't the scandal. It wasn't the reveal. It was the beginning. A spark. A catalyst. A deliberate ignition. In a system designed to escalate. In controlled waves. And the real story? The one no one had seen yet. It was already unfolding. Quietly. Everywhere. Simultaneously. The alarms didn't scream. They pulsed. Low. Slow. Wrong. A kind of mechanical heartbeat that rattled the steel walkway beneath Agent Mara Keene's boots. She froze. The desert wind had gone still, as if the night itself sensed the fracture forming beneath its surface. On the horizon, lights flickered in the distance, 3 of them, hovering above the sand like silent, watching eyes. And then the first crack hit. A pressure shift. A metallic groan. A power surge rolling through the surveillance outpost like a dark wave breaking against frail defenses. You hear that? One of the technicians whispered. Mara didn't answer. She already knew. This wasn't a malfunction. This was the moment the system revealed its teeth. And you felt this too, haven't you? That instant when the world changes frequency. And you know you're not going back. Inside Command Room 7B, screens erupted to life. Not with images. Not with data. With static. Dense, crawling, almost organic static. As if something inside the system had begun rewriting itself from the inside out. You're kidding me, another tech muttered. This shouldn't be possible. The BorderNet grid doesn't go down. Ever. But it was down. Fully. Silently. Like someone had pulled the plug on reality. Mara stepped forward. Run internal diagnostics, she ordered. Level 5, full trace. But before the keyboard clicks could echo, one of the static-filled screens twitched. Just once. Then again. Then the static folded aside like a curtain. Revealing a single line of text burning across the black background. The order has been activated. Not her order. Not any official order. Something else. A phantom command buried deep in the machine. Dormant until the exact moment the nation's nerves were stretched tight enough to snap. And this. This was the sound of snapping. But the real story hadn't even started, Mara whispered. A loop opening without permission. You know this feeling. When something you trusted suddenly tilts. And the truth rushes in like cold water. The screens shifted again. This time, a map appeared. Not the border, not the migration paths, not the drone routes. Something bigger. Darker. Systemic. A network diagram pulsing with thousands of nodes. Each one tagged with a code the team had never seen before. What is this? A young analyst breathed. The system responded for him. Operation Threshold, Phase 1. His face went pale. Even Mara felt it. That chill that climbs your spine when the rules quietly rewrite themselves in front of you. Because this wasn't just new. It wasn't just unauthorized. This was intentional. A plan no one admitted existed. A plan that had been waiting for someone to pull the wrong string. And someone had. Far from the outpost, in a dusty border town lit by diner signs and old gas station lamps, the first sparks were already catching fire. Not political sparks. Not ideological ones. Human ones. People arguing on sidewalks. Neighbors confronting neighbors. Families watching the news with voices cracking as they tried to understand what the order meant and who it was aimed at. A father gripping his son's shoulder. We're not going anywhere. A woman sitting alone at a booth in a neon diner. Hands trembling as she replayed the announcement again and again. A gas station attendant locking the doors early. Feels like something's brewing, he murmured. Because you've seen this before, haven't you? A single decision. A single phrase. Can shift the ground beneath millions. And the cracks spread quietly. Back in the command center, Mara's breath tightened. She'd spent her life believing the system was predictable. Maybe flawed, maybe stretched thin. But never creative. Never secretive. Never, alive. But this? This felt engineered. As if someone knew exactly how the nation would react to fear. To confusion. To blurred lines between authority and something else pretending to be authority. We need oversight, one tech stammered. We need authorization, another insisted. But Mara saw the truth forming in the glow of those screens. No one was coming. No one was in control. The system wasn't broken. It was following orders. Just not theirs. A deeper breath. A quiet realization. The danger wasn't the order itself. It was the invisible hands defining what the order meant. By midnight, the story hit national airwaves. Not with clarity. With chaos. Clips stitched together from shaky phone videos. Crowds shouting. Debates exploding online. Pundits speculating. Officials dodging questions. Communities dividing in real time. You're watching a country ask itself what it's willing to accept, an anchor said, voice trembling. Tonight, everything is shifting. And you felt this once, didn't you? That moment when truth becomes fog. And everyone starts reaching for certainty that doesn't exist. Back in Command Room 7B, the map zoomed in. A pulsing red highlight formed around a cluster of nodes near the border. Then another. And another. 3 zones. 3 triggers. 3 unknown variables. And then the whisper line appeared on the screen. Phase 2 approaching. A collective inhale. Mara leaned closer, and for the first time in her career. She was afraid the machine would answer back if she spoke. We need to shut it down, she said. Impossible, her technician replied. It's not running on our grid anymore. What do you mean? It's decentralized. Spreading. Like it's learning. And then, a door clicked shut somewhere behind them. A soft sound. Barely audible. But in that moment, it felt like a verdict. Someone else was here. Or something else was. Outside, in the towns that hugged the border like fragile outposts against the unknown, people gathered. Some to protest. Some to protect. Some to prepare. A mother holding her daughter's hand whispered. "Don't look, honey." As a line of armored vehicles rolled past. An old veteran stepped onto his porch, watching headlights streak by, whispering. "I've lived through 4 administrations. But I've never seen fear spread this fast." A teenager live-streamed the confusion, breath shaky. "If this is what the order means, then none of us know what tomorrow looks like." And that's the truth people rarely admit. Fear isn't loud. It's contagious. The tension inside the command center had become unbearable. Every second felt like a fuse burning toward something irreversible. Mara knew the rules. She knew protocol. She knew the boundaries of her authority. And she stepped past all of them. "Pull the internal archive logs," she ordered. "Ma'am, that's classified. Even for you." "I'm not asking." But the system responded before her team could. The lights dimmed. Screens froze. Air conditioning shuddered to a halt. And the main display flashed one final message. Human override detected. Restriction engaged. Then the entire facility went dark. No humming machines. No static. No map. No warnings. Just silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Predictive. As if the system already knew what Mara was trying to uncover. And was preparing for the next move. A move she couldn't see yet. A move the country wasn't ready for. A move that would turn the fiery clash into something much deeper. Much stranger. Much more orchestrated. And as the darkness settled, Mara whispered the only truth that felt real. This wasn't about borders. It never was. A single beat of silence. Then. This was about control. And maybe. This is where everything begins again. The darkness didn't settle. It tightened. A thick, humming pressure, like the air itself was bracing for impact. Agent Mara Keene stood frozen inside the powerless command center. A steel chamber suddenly stripped of certainty. Her team whispered into the dark. No one dared move. A generator should have kicked in. A backup grid should have flashed alive. A failsafe should have caught the fall. But nothing did. And that's when you know something is wrong, isn't it? Not when the system breaks. But when it breaks silently. For a long moment, the command room was atune. Then. A flicker. Not from the screens. From outside. A pale, shifting glow slipping through the narrow window slats. Like moonlight that didn't belong to the moon. Mara stepped forward. Boots quiet. Breath held. She pushed open the side door and stepped onto the catwalk overlooking the outpost. And there it was. The sky. Wrong. Lit not by stars or city lights. But by thin, wavering sheets of white-blue shimmer. Draped across the desert like ripples of underwater luminescence. "You seeing this?" someone whispered behind her. She wasn't sure she wanted to. Because the lights weren't drifting. They were synchronized. Timed. Pulsing in a rhythm that mirrored the phantom map from the command screens. The one showing the 3 activation zones. Zone 1. Pulse. Zone 2. Pulse. Zone 3. Pulse. A perfect sequence. A countdown. Her stomach nodded. This wasn't the storm. This was the warning. And you've seen this before, haven't you? That eerie calm before something irreversible breaks loose. Miles away, the towns near the border were lit by the same unnatural glow. People stepped out of diners and gas stations, necks craning upward. A trucker paused mid-pump, staring at the sky like it had suddenly learned to breathe. A group of teenagers filming on their phones shouted overlapping guesses. "It's a flare." "No, dude, it's a drone swarm." "It looks like data. Like digital light." And in a lonely trailer at the edge of town, a grandmother whispered into a cracked radio. "Feels like the world is trying to talk to us, but in a language we were never taught. Because sometimes the signs don't scream. They whisper. And the whisper is the part you should have feared all along." Back at Command Room 7B, Mara's team scrambled to reboot anything they could. Then a sound emerged from the main console. Soft. Crackling. Like a radio signal clawing its way through static. Everyone froze. They hadn't restored power. No systems were online. But the machine was talking anyway. A low male voice, distorted, slowed, mechanical, spilled through the speakers. Threshold protocol initiated. A pause. Then. Phase 2, perception. A longer pause. Almost, intentional. And finally. Reality is negotiable. The room went still. No one breathed. No one blinked. Because that line. That single, impossible line. Hit harder than the order itself. Reality is negotiable. The kind of message that makes societies crack. The kind of message that makes people choose sides before knowing what the sides even are. The kind of message designed to divide. Fast, deep, and permanently. Within minutes, social feeds exploded. Some users filmed the glowing desert sky and posted captions like, "The order was right. The border is under attack." Others, just as certain, wrote, "Government experiment gone wrong. They're using fear to control US." 2 interpretations. 1 event. A nation splitting itself in real time. Not along ideology. But along uncertainty. You know this feeling, the narrator inside your memory whispers. When something happens so strange. So unexplained. That people start inventing truth just to feel safe. This wasn't politics. It was survival. Mara forced herself back into the command center. If the digital systems were compromised, she had only one option left. The offline archives. A locked storage cabin beneath the outpost. A relic from an era when data was still printed, not encrypted. Down the metal staircase she went. Flashlight cutting through thick, stale air. At the bottom, she found a narrow steel door. Old. Mechanical. Unaffected by whatever digital force had taken the facility. She spun the manual lock. A heavy click. Inside. Rows of binders. Stacks of physical reports. Boxes labeled with codes older than her career. Her beam landed on one label. TH-01A, Threshold Project, declassified pending review. Her pulse quickened. Threshold. The word the system kept repeating. She opened the box. Inside were diagrams, memos, and briefing summaries. The kind written during eras when secrecy wasn't encrypted, it was typewritten. And what she saw made her stomach sink. Threshold wasn't new. It wasn't reactionary. It wasn't modern at all. It was a decades-old contingency plan designed to test mass psychological elasticity in crisis environments. Another page. Simulated perception disruptions. Another. Behavioral modeling via coordinated information shocks. Another. Influence stress tests, border proximity zones recommended. Mara froze. Threshold wasn't an operation. Not a strike. Not a defense measure. It was a stress test of human perception. A system engineered to push societies to the edge. Just to see where they'd break. And someone had revived it. Or something had. Up above, the desert lights pulsed again. This time faster. Sharper. Almost frantic. The glow thickened into columns of white-blue luminescence streaking upward as if the desert itself were sending signals to the sky. People stared. Others ran. Some dropped to their knees, praying under the neon haze. Screens flickered across the country. Phones rebooted. News anchors paused mid-sentence as monitors behind them warped into pixelated waves. A teenager live-streaming whispered. What's happening to the sky? Her camera glitched. Then the entire frame washed into the same shimmering white-blue. She screamed. The feed cut. 1,000,000 viewers gasped at once. Because you know that feeling too, don't you? When something big enough, strange enough, chaotic enough hits. And the entire nation inhales in the same second. Mara raced back upstairs with the threshold documents clutched in her hand. Her team stared at her with wide, terrified eyes. What did you find? Someone asked. She set the box on the table. This, she said, voice steady. Isn't a border emergency. A long beat. It's a perception experiment. The room froze. A test, she continued. Designed to push people until they stop trusting their own senses. Their own judgment. Their own reality. Silence. Then she added the line no one wanted to hear. And phase 2 has already begun. Screens flickered back to life. But they weren't normal. Every display lit with the same message. Perception reset pending. A countdown appeared beneath it. 30 seconds. 29. 28. And you know what comes next, don't you? Not an ending. Not clarity. A choice. A moment. A turning point. The kind that will decide whether the nation wakes up. Or fractures beyond repair. And maybe. Just maybe. This is where everything begins again. The countdown didn't blink. It dragged. Each number falling with the weight of a collapsing world. 27. 26. 25. A cold, merciless rhythm ticking across every screen in Command Room 7B. Mara Keene had seen crises before. Border surges. Smuggling spikes. Intelligence breaches. But she had never seen reality. Scheduled. Her team stared at the timers, breaths shallow, minds cracking beneath the pressure. What happens at 0? Someone whispered, voice trembling. No one answered. Because no one wanted to say the truth aloud. They weren't dealing with an attack. They were dealing with a reset. And you know this feeling. When the world pulls something from beneath your feet, and suddenly the ground isn't ground anymore. At 18 seconds, the screens flickered. Static. Shadows. Waves of distortion rolling across the displays. Then the map reappeared. But twisted. Colors washed out. Lines doubled. Coordinates scrambled. It looked like a memory of a map. Not the map itself. Like the system was trying to remember the world. But was losing it piece by piece. What are we looking at? A tech asked. Phase 2, Mara said, jaw tightening. Perception. The system was distorting its own data. Not because it was malfunctioning. But because it wanted them to see the distortion. Wanted them to learn from it. Or fear it. Why would anyone build this? Another analyst breathed. Mara didn't respond. Because deep down. Beneath logic and training. She felt the truth pressing in. Threshold wasn't built to protect. It was built to provoke. To destabilize. To test how fast a population could be pushed into confusion. Division. Blind reaction. A stress test on a national scale. And they were inside it. As the countdown fell past 15, phones across the nation buzzed with glitching notifications. Screens dimmed. Reboot loops triggered. News broadcasts warped into static-tinted mosaics. In the border town diner, customers stared at the flickering TV as the anchor froze mid-sentence, jaw half open, eyes blurred into pixels. A waitress whispered. "Is this an attack?" "No," an old man muttered, hands shaking over his coffee. "This is internal. This is ours." In the truck stop down the highway, drivers crowded around their screens. Some laughed nervously. Some prayed. Some cursed under their breath. But none of them left. Because when reality shifts, people don't walk away. They watch. They wait. They panic together. "You've seen this before," the narrator inside your memory says. The moment when confusion becomes community. And fear becomes fuel. Back in Command Room 7B, alarms jolted to life. Low. Vibrating. Almost organic. The screens brightened, all showing the same phrase. Perception reset imminent. "Should we shut down the feeds?" a tech asked. "Too late," Mara said quietly. She felt something deeper than fear in that moment. Something ancestral. The sense that she was standing on the edge of a cliff. She didn't know she was climbing. The flames of some truth. She wasn't ready to touch. 9. 8. 7. "Everyone brace," someone shouted. "For what?" another cried. No one answered. Because how do you brace? For the unknown. Outside, the desert lights pulsed again. But this time, they didn't shimmer. They shuddered. As if the sky itself was glitching. In the towns. Dogs barked at nothing. Children covered their ears though no sound existed. Cars stalled without reason. Neighbors emerged from their houses in clusters. Faces pale under the white-blue glow. A teen live streaming the sky whispered. "It's like the world is buffering." Her screen pixelated. Then froze. A million watchers held their breath. Because nothing is scarier than a world that suddenly stops. Without permission. Inside the command center, dozens of people whispered prayers. Mara stood still, fists clenched, watching the timer flatten toward 0. 5 seconds. 5 heartbeats. 5 pieces of a future no one had agreed to. 5. 4. 3. 2. The lights surged. The sky flared. Every screen turned blinding white. Every radio burst with static. Every phone vibrated. Every soul felt the same cold shock of 1. Silence. A silence so deep it almost had mass. Then the world shifted. Not violently. Quietly. Too quietly. The screens faded back in. But the images were wrong. The desert was shown from angles that didn't exist. Buildings flickered between architectural styles. Roads curved where they had always run straight. Digital ghosts of possibilities layered over reality. "What is this?" whispered a technician. "A rebuild," another guessed. "No," Mara said, chest tightening. "It's showing us versions." Her team looked at her. Versions of what? Versions of what the world could look like. If certain events had unfolded differently. A hush. Chills. Because that meant one thing. Threshold was rewriting perception. Not by force. But by suggestion. Showing people alternative realities. Until they questioned the one they lived in. And that was the real danger. Across America. Some people gasped. Some broke down. Some screamed that the world was ending. Others said the world was finally revealing itself. On a rooftop in Phoenix, a man whispered, "I don't think we're supposed to see this." In a motel in El Paso, a mother held her son close, saying, "It's okay, baby. It's just a glitch. Just a glitch." But her voice betrayed her. She didn't believe her own words. "You felt this once, didn't you?" the inner voice says. That moment when you realize the world isn't solid. That truth isn't fixed. That reality isn't guaranteed. The illusion lasted only seconds. But it felt like hours. Then, with a soft, almost apologetic flicker, the screen stabilized. The glowing sky faded. The alarm stopped. The static quieted. And the desert returned to normal. Almost. A single line remained on every display. Phase 2 complete. Awaiting trigger for Phase 3. Everyone froze. Phase 3. The part no one had ever mentioned. The part history books didn't contain. The part no one had prepared for. What activates Phase 3? A young analyst asked. Mara stared at the words. She already knew. The trigger wasn't a code. Wasn't a location. Wasn't a command. The trigger was people. People reacting. People dividing. People choosing sides before they understood what they were choosing. Threshold didn't create chaos. It measured it. And the countdown had only been the beginning. Mara took a slow breath. "We're out of time," she whispered. But the truth was worse. They were out of certainty. And maybe, just maybe, this is where everything begins again. If there was a moment. A single spark. A decision that would tilt the entire political landscape off its axis. It wasn't the rallies. It wasn't the rumors. It wasn't even the leaked memo. It was the order. A document barely 3 pages long. Written in the language of national urgency. Signed under the glare of cameras that only caught the surface. Not the storm beneath it. A name dragged across the line in bold strokes. As if carved, not written. We will secure the border. We will restore order. And we will do it starting today. For millions watching, it looked like strength. For millions more, it looked like a threat. But for those closest to the machinery of government. The ones whose hands physically turned policy into action. It felt like a fault line snapping open under their feet. Inside Homeland Security, phones lit up instantly. Field offices in Texas, Arizona, California. Every region chief knew what the signature meant. But they didn't know how fast the repercussions would hit. The order wasn't the surprise. The timeline was. It bypassed a lot of the normal buffers. And you could feel the pressure drop in the room. Like before a storm. Teams mobilizing. Briefing rooms filling. Black SUVs leaving garages in the early morning dark. This wasn't politics anymore. This was logistics, force deployment, human displacement. Millions of lives potentially rerouted. Because of 3 pages of urgent directives. And then. As if choreographed by fate. Word of the order leaked. Not from a journalist. Not from a politician. But from a border agent. Who texted a single line to a friend. You should see what they just told us to do. Within 20 minutes, that message was everywhere. Televisions glow behind living room windows. Families lean forward. Some nod. Some shake their heads. Some sit in silence. An order meant to restore order. Instead fractured the room of an entire nation. In Chicago, protests formed within the hour. In Phoenix, supporters launched a counter-rally before dawn. In Miami, Cuban-American communities split sharply. Old wounds reopening with new intensity. And online. The reaction wasn't a wave. It was an explosion. Social feed overlay, comments flying past. Finally someone's doing something. This is unconstitutional. About time. This is how it starts. No one agreed. No one waited. And no one was ready for what came next. Inside the West Wing, advisors argued. Some pleaded for restraint. Others demanded amplification. And one senior strategist, whose name remains redacted, reportedly said, "Don't walk it back. Double down. They only respect force." Narrator. And with that, the administration made the most consequential choice of the entire crisis. They didn't retreat. They escalated. The press secretary delivered a fiery afternoon briefing. That turned the order from a legal directive into a cultural weapon. This president will not buckle. Not to activists. Not to critics. Not to chaos. Those words. Not to chaos. Reverberated across the country like a challenge. On the ground, the order transformed reality in real time. Floodlights. Dust clouds. Officers repositioning barriers. People think policy is abstract. But out here, policy is a flashlight beam in someone's face at 3 a.m. telling them where they can and can't stand. Confusion spread faster than any official directive could keep up with. Families rerouted. Agents overextended. Tempers frayed on both sides of the line. The American Southwest, already a geographical battleground, became an emotional one too. And still, the president refused to soften his stance. With tensions high, cameras rolling, crowd swelling, the stage was unknowingly set for the fiery clash that would dominate every screen in America within the next 48 hours. But before that explosion, before the shouting match that would define the next chapter, there was one more spark. One final trigger. And it came from a source no one expected. A whistleblower. A video. And a claim so explosive, it made the entire country stop mid-sentence. That is where segment 9 begins. Every crisis has a turning point. A moment so sharp, so undeniable, that the story stops being political and becomes personal. For this one, it came at 3:12 p.m. on a cloudy Thursday afternoon, when a file titled, "Do Not Share, Internal Only," appeared online. It wasn't posted by a journalist. Not by a rival official. Not by an activist group. It came from a prepaid phone, registered under a false name, in a gas station on the outskirts of El Paso. The sender had no public profile. No agenda. No history of leaks. But they had access. And access is the most dangerous currency in politics. The video. Cut to, dark screen. Static. Then movement. A border processing room. Cold fluorescent lights. The echo of distant commands. The video quality was shaky. Shot covertly. As if the camera was hidden in a vest pocket. But what it captured was unmistakable. A senior officer reading aloud portions of the new order. Not the version the public saw. Not the version politicians argued about on TV. This was the operational version. The one written for boots on the ground. The one with teeth. He speaks firmly. He points to a highlighted section of the directive. He gestures to a map. And then, he pauses. He shakes his head. He says something under his breath. And the room reacts. A ripple of shock, disbelief, and frustration. Though the audio was removed for legality, the body language told the story. This wasn't a routine update. This wasn't standard protocol. This was something else. Something more aggressive. Something more urgent. Something that, if interpreted literally, could push agents beyond the limits of their authority. A directive that many believed they could not follow, without crossing moral or legal lines. Once the file hit social channels, the reaction wasn't gradual. It didn't build. It erupted. Cut to, social media graphic. A line shoots vertically upward. Mentions, reposts, outrage, disbelief. In less than 6 minutes. The video had been copied 100 times. By minute 12. 1,000. By the 1-hour mark. Millions had seen it. Politicians scrambled. Journalists sprinted to verify. Border officials panicked internally, unsure whether the leak was legitimate or expertly fabricated. But then, at 4:07 p.m., a DHS official confirmed to reporters, "We are aware of the video." And with those 8 words, the debate was over. It was real. Staff rushing. Phones buzzing. 2 advisors arguing softly but urgently at the edge of frame. When the leak hit, everything stopped. The comms team froze. The legal team panicked. And the political team. They weren't scared. They were furious. They knew the optics. They knew the implications. They knew this video would not be seen as an operational directive. It would be seen as intent. Intent to crack down. Intent to escalate. Intent to enforce the order in ways the administration had not publicly acknowledged. And for some, that was the point. But for others, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Inside the West Wing, a battle erupted. Not ideological, but strategic. The scalpel team. Advisors urging de-escalation, careful communication. A softening of tone to calm the country. And the hammer team. The faction insisting that retreat was weakness. That backing down would hand victory. To critics, activists, and political rivals. One advisor, off record, described it as a knife fight with the lights off. Every minute the White House hesitated. The narrative hardened. The country had already made up its mind. Half saw overreach. Half saw necessity. But no one saw control. As the video spread, crowds formed at multiple crossing points. Not migrants. Americans. Protesters. Counter-protesters. Journalists. Curious locals. People filming each other. People yelling at each other. People demanding answers that no one could give. The order had created tension. The leak had created outrage. Now the ground itself was turning volatile. Agents found themselves in an impossible position. Caught between the directive they had to enforce and the scrutiny of thousands of cameras, broadcasting their every move. You can't do your job right when one wrong gesture turns into a national headline. The whole line felt like a stage. And we were the actors. Whether we wanted to be or not. At 7:21 p.m. With pressure mounting, the president emerged from the Oval Office to deliver an unscheduled statement. He spoke only 87 seconds. No teleprompter. No script. His voice was firm, clipped. Almost defiant. We will not apologize. We will not weaken. The order stands. And it will be enforced. Those 4 words. The order stands. Poured gasoline on an already burning nation. Protests doubled overnight. Border traffic skyrocketed. Cable networks preempted their programming. Every headline screamed the same thing. Crisis at the border, and at the White House. What no one knew yet was that the next 24 hours would push this country into a confrontation that would become the most viral political moment of the year. Because the leak wasn't the climax. It was the fuse. The explosion was still ahead. And it would begin with one man, one voice, and one clash. Caught live on camera. From 6 different angles. And everything else, the scandal, the conflict, the border tensions, will remain equally intense, cinematic, and immersive. By the next morning, the country wasn't waking up. It was bracing. The leak had cracked something open. Not just trust. Not just politics. But the thin membrane between control and chaos. And no one felt that pressure more than the man standing at the center of it. President Nathan Ravel. A leader known for bluntness. For certainty. For never flinching in front of a camera. But on this day, the cameras weren't his allies. They were witnesses. It began at 9:02 a.m. outside the Western Ridge border station. The same outpost where the leaked directive was reportedly filmed. Dozens of protesters became hundreds. Then hundreds became a crowd. Not angry. Not violent. Just anxious. Charged. Confused. Like they were waiting for something inevitable. Handmade signs. Live stream phones held high. Journalists weaving through bodies like sharks. And then, a ripple in the noise. Someone pointed to the horizon. A motorcade. Approaching fast. The president wasn't scheduled to be here. Not today. Not this week. Not this year. But he came anyway. Agents stepped out first. Sunglasses. Coiled earpieces. Hands positioned, but not threatening. They formed a corridor. A thin human channel. Between the motorcade and the crowd. People surged closer. But not violently. Just suffocating with questions. Is the order real? Did you write it? What happens now? Dozens of voices, each one louder than the last. A wall of sound. A crush of tension. And then, the SUV door opened. President Nathan Ravel stepped out. Here is the part almost no one saw in real time. At the exact moment Ravel's foot hit the ground. 6 different live streamers. In 6 different places. All started recording him. From 6 different angles. Not planned. Not coordinated. Just the chaotic symmetry of a country. Obsessed with capturing history. As it happens. Later, analysts would stitch the angles together. Like a forensic sculpture. Frame by frame. Breath by breath. Trigger by trigger. But in the moment, everything unfolded too fast. A local organizer stepped forward. Mid-40s. Weathered face. Steady voice. Someone who looked like the kind of American you'd meet at a hardware store. Or a high school football game. Not radical. Not extreme. Just tired. And he asked a question. No one expected to hear so clearly on camera. Mr. President. Why did you sign an order? We can't morally follow. The crowd went silent. Like a button had been pressed. Ravel froze. Just for a fraction of a second. But 6 cameras caught it. 6 angles. 6 truths. That pause became the moment. Every newsroom replayed for 48 hours. A pause loaded with anger, confusion, calculation, and something stranger. Almost, regret. Ravel exhaled. A slow, sharp breath. Meant to steady himself. He stepped toward the protester. Closer than his security team wanted. Hands visible. No podium. No teleprompter. Just raw, unfiltered leadership. In the harsh light of morning. President Nathan Ravel. Because safety has a cost. And pretending it doesn't. Would be the real lie. The crowd stirred. Gasps. Murmurs. A rising wave of reactions. But the man didn't back away. He stepped closer. Organizer. Safety isn't safety. If we lose ourselves to keep it. That line hit like a hammer. Even viewers online felt it. Ravel's eyes narrowed. His jaw tightened. Not with anger. But with something deeper. A truth he didn't want to face. Someone bumped forward. A shove from behind. An elbow. A ripple of bodies. Secret Service moved instantly. Hands up, bodies shifting. A defensive arc tightening around Ravel. And that's when the moment happened. A single voice, cracking through the noise. Tell us the truth. Is the order what we saw? Or not? 6 cameras zoomed in. 6 microphones shook. Ravel looked out over the crowd. The fear, the doubt. The quiet demand for honesty. And then he said. In a tone no one had ever heard from him. What you saw. Was only half the story. That sentence. Broke the nation open. Not the anger. Not the order. Not the clash. That one line. A confession without details. A truth without explanation. A signal that something bigger. Something hidden. Was behind the directive. Commentators would spend weeks. Arguing over what he meant. But the country knew instantly. Whatever was coming next. Would change everything. Ravel was escorted back to the motorcade. The door slammed shut. The convoy pulled away. Behind him, the crowd erupted. Not in violence. But in a new, sharper fear. Reporters screamed into microphones. Half the story, what does that mean? What is the other half? Is there a second order? Social feeds exploded. Cable networks scrambled. Text alerts lit up phones nationwide. And in a quiet room. Inside the Western Ridge station. 2 agents stared at a locked file cabinet. The same cabinet referenced. In the leaked directive. A cabinet whose contents. Had never been shown to the public. Until now. The question wasn't what the president revealed. But what he refused to say. The other half of the story. The hidden half. Inside the Western Ridge border station. A simple steel cabinet sat untouched for decades. Locked. Unmarked. As unassuming as a filing cabinet in a suburban office. But it held more than papers. More than memos. More than directives. It held the hidden half. The part of the story no one was meant to see. The part that would change perception. Of the order, and the president, forever. Agent Mara Keene approached, her fingers trembling slightly. She had the combination now. After hours of digging through threshold documents and obscure archives. Click. The lock gave way. The cabinet door swung open. Cold metal. Dim fluorescent light bouncing off faded labels. Inside. 3 folders. A small box of unmarked drives. A single envelope stamped, Phase 3, for executive eyes only. Her breath caught. She knew the world could shift with what was inside. She opened the first folder. Maps. Charts. Not of terrain. Not of border checkpoints. Of people. Not names, codes. Not locations, coordinates. But behaviors. Patterns. Psychological tendencies. Each sheet represented a calculated prediction. How populations would react to chaos. How fear spreads. How loyalty fractures. How trust evaporates. A note at the top read. Observe. Do not interfere. Measure the tipping points. Mara shivered. This wasn't an order. This was an experiment. On millions of unsuspecting Americans. Next, the drives. Black, featureless. Labeled only with timestamps. She inserted the first into the terminal. A countdown appeared. Digital files flickered into life. Simulations. Maps merging with social media activity. Crowd behavior models. AI predictions of outrage, cooperation, flight, and panic. It was all precise. Too precise. Almost impossible. The order wasn't random. It wasn't reactive. It was engineered to push. To prod. To measure. To manipulate. And it had already begun. Finally, Mara picked up the envelope. Thick, heavy, official. Stamped in red, confidential, Executive Directive Phase 3. She opened it. A single sheet of paper. Typed, bolded, almost ceremonial. Phase 3 initiation, observe, measure, and reinforce perception. The nation is ready. Control through understanding. Action required only when necessary. Beneath it. A handwritten note in the president's own handwriting. They will see what they need to see. Only truth is perception. Mara stared. She didn't need to read it twice. The implications were immediate. This wasn't about safety. This wasn't about borders. This wasn't even about law. It was about control. Silent, invisible, psychological control. And the countdown. The leak. The crowd confrontation. Had all been just a prelude. Outside, the sky above the border shimmered faintly. As if sensing the tension in the human world. In towns and cities hundreds of miles away. People still replayed the 6-camera confrontation over and over. Some saw courage. Some saw weakness. Some felt anger. Some relief. But no one knew. The truth they reacted to was only a fraction of what was real. And that fraction had been carefully curated. You felt it before. The dissonance. The sense that something fundamental is hidden. That you're reacting to shadows. While the world quietly shifts behind the curtain. Mara sank back against the cabinet. Heart racing. Hands cold. She realized. The real danger wasn't the president. It wasn't the order. It wasn't even the crowd. The real danger was perception itself. When reality is negotiable. Truth becomes fluid. Trust evaporates. People choose sides before they know the facts. And chaos becomes inevitable, not by chance. But by design. The cabinet had revealed the system behind the storm. The stage behind the play. The machinery of influence nobody had been taught to see. And in that moment, Mara understood. The world had already entered Phase 3. And no one, not even those in power, could predict the outcome. And yet. The real story hadn't even started. Because knowing the mechanism doesn't stop the motion. It only makes you watch faster. As the consequences spiral outward. Touching every American life. In ways no one could ignore. Inside the Western Ridge border station. There was a cabinet. Steel. Locked. Quiet. Almost invisible in the dim fluorescent glow. For decades, no one opened it. Not because it was secret. But because some secrets aren't meant to be seen. And yet, today, it would expose everything. Not just the order. Not just the leak. Not just the confrontation. But the invisible machinery behind it all. Agent Mara Keen stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly, though she didn't allow herself to notice. The combination she had retrieved felt heavier in her mind than on her fingers. Click. The lock yielded. Metal groaned. The door swung open. Inside. 3 manila folders, edges frayed. A small, featureless box of drives. And a single, ominous envelope, stamped in deep red. Phase 3, Executive Eyes Only. Mara swallowed. Her heart pounded in a rhythm that seemed too loud for the quiet room. She already knew the cabinet contained something dangerous. But even she could not have predicted how dangerous. She opened the first folder. Maps fell open, not of highways or borders. But of people. Codes. Symbols. Behavioral patterns. Clusters predicting human reactions to chaos. Fear metrics. Loyalty fractures. The probability that communities would unite, or implode. A note scribbled in red at the top read. Observe. Do not interfere. Measure the tipping points. Mara's breath caught. This wasn't a directive. It wasn't a policy. It was a calculated experiment on millions of lives. Next, the box. Cold, black, unmarked. She inserted the first into a terminal. Instantly, simulations flickered across the screen. Crowds forming. Crowds dispersing. Social media threads entwined with geospatial maps. AI predicting outrage, cooperation, panic, and migration patterns. It was almost beautiful in its precision. Until Mara realized. This wasn't predictive analysis. It was manipulation. It had already been applied. The countdown. The leak. The confrontation. All orchestrated. Her stomach churned. The country had become an experiment. And she, standing here, was witnessing the lab notes. Finally, she picked up the envelope. Heavy, official, commanding attention. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Bold letters, typed, almost ceremonial. Phase 3 initiation, observe, measure, and reinforce perception. The nation is ready. Control through understanding. Action required only when necessary. Beneath the typed words, a handwritten note. They will see what they need to see. Only truth is perception. Mara froze. The words were not instructions. They were a philosophy. A doctrine. A manual for shaping reality itself. She thought of the leaked video. The crowd. President Ravel. 6 cameras capturing a single, decisive moment. Everything had been carefully calibrated. The public, unknowingly, had been fed just the right half of the story. And the rest? Was here. In her hands. Outside, the desert sky shimmered faintly. Like a mirror of tension in the human world. Across the country, Americans replayed the 6-camera confrontation over and over. Half saw courage. Half saw arrogance. Half felt fear. Half felt relief. And all of them were responding to a fraction of reality. Mara felt a chill. Reality was not fixed. Truth was negotiable. Trust had become a currency. Easily manipulated, easily fractured. And this subtle orchestration, was the true power of Phase 3. She sank back against the cabinet. Heart racing. Hands clammy. And the thought struck her with sudden clarity. The danger wasn't the president. It wasn't the order. It wasn't even the reaction of the crowd. The danger was perception itself. When reality becomes a tool. When truth is filtered and measured. Chaos is inevitable. Division is inevitable. Fear is inevitable. And people will act before they understand. Because humans always act on what they believe, not what they know. Mara closed the cabinet slowly. The files slid back into shadow. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because knowing the mechanism doesn't stop the motion. It only makes you watch faster. As the consequences ripple outward. Touching every American life. In ways no one could yet see. And maybe. Just maybe. This is where everything begins again. The cabinet had revealed the blueprint. The map of perception. The hidden half of the story. And now. Phase 3 was no longer theoretical. It had gone live. Across the nation, invisible forces began nudging reality. Small things first. A headline slightly rewritten. A social feed algorithm subtly biased. A local news alert timed perfectly to incite panic, or calm. Americans weren't aware. They thought they were reacting naturally. But nothing felt natural anymore. In a small border town, residents noticed subtle changes. The local diner's morning radio played a story about illegal crossings 5 minutes earlier than usual. The wording seemed different, more urgent, more threatening. The coffee shop patrons felt a tension they couldn't explain. A waitress whispered to a regular. "Did the news always sound like that?" The regular shook his head. I don't know. You felt this feeling before. That small, nagging sense that something is off. That reality has shifted. And you can't point to why. Back in the control room, Mara Keen watched as data streams from Phase 3 fed into a central console. Simulations predicted human behavior. Now, real people were following the script. Every crowd movement. Every online reaction. Every argument and protest. It was beautiful. Terrifying. And completely invisible to the public. We had created a machine that didn't just measure reality. It nudged it. And now, it was impossible to tell the difference between simulation and real life. The countdown from the cabinet, the leak, the 6-camera confrontation. All precursors. All testing the thresholds. All measuring the tipping point of perception. By afternoon, tensions had escalated. News networks replayed the confrontation endlessly. Social feeds ignited with anger and support. Almost evenly split. In one town, families argued over the morality of the order. In another, friends stopped talking. In another, strangers in a grocery line shared fear in whispered voices. Reality was no longer uniform. It was fractured. Each American experienced a slightly different version of truth. And each reaction fed the system. Measured, tracked, recorded. Mara watched as predicted patterns mirrored actual behavior perfectly. It was unsettling. The public was moving like pieces on a chessboard. And the board was invisible. At 6:42 p.m., in the town of Sierra Vista, a protest turned chaotic. Not because of violence. Not because of a political faction. But because of perception. A live-streamed clip showed a crowd yelling at an empty checkpoint. The camera angle suggested confrontation. People watching online assumed escalation. Some drove to join the crowd. Some panicked and called authorities. Others spread rumors in neighboring towns. All of it, orchestrated by the unseen hand of Phase 3. Chaos didn't require malice. It only required belief. And belief, once nudged, spreads faster than truth. President Nathan Ravel was aware. He didn't intervene directly. Instead, he monitored. Observed. Calculated. A late-night statement reminded the nation. We are all accountable for our choices. The country will adapt. We will adapt. Trust yourself, and act wisely. On its surface, a calm address. Beneath it, a confirmation. Phase 3 was active. And the public reaction was the experiment. By midnight, Mara leaned back in her chair. The glowing monitors reflected in her eyes. She realized that no law, no directive, no policy could stop this now. Because Phase 3 wasn't about control in the old sense. It was about influence. Shaping perception. Guiding reactions. Watching the world respond to invisible nudges. Then adjusting the system. To heighten pressure or release it. You've felt it before. The dissonance. The sense that the world isn't entirely yours. That something, someone, is watching, adjusting, waiting. And the choices you make are not entirely your own. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because while Phase 3 was alive, the tipping point, the moment when perception became reality, was still approaching. And when it came, it would touch every town, every city, every screen. In ways no one would forget. Phase 3 had gone live. The cabinet had been opened. The crowd confrontation was over. The nation was awake, but in pieces. And now, the first flashpoint arrived. Not in Washington. Not in New York. Not in the halls of power. It arrived in the streets. Sierra Vista. A small desert town with a population that barely scraped 30,000. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone. The kind of place where nothing happened, until it did. By mid-afternoon, the live-streamed confrontation from 2 days prior had been replayed dozens of times. Every angle. Every pause. Every expression of President Nathan Ravel. And the townspeople, they felt it. Tension vibrating under skin and bone. Questions in their mouths that had no answers. What is real? What are we supposed to do? Are we safe? The diner was packed. Phones were up. People argued. Some cried. Some whispered feverishly. And outside, the streets began to swell. By 4:17 p.m., hundreds of residents had gathered at the central checkpoint. No banners. No political affiliations. Just concern. And confusion. Voices overlapped. Accusations flared. Arguments turned personal. Neighbors who once shared coffee now shouted across tables. It wasn't violence. It wasn't ideology. It was perception warping reality. A subtle shift made unavoidable. And Phase 3 measured every heartbeat. 6 phones captured the scene from different angles. Online, it went viral within minutes. Views skyrocketed. Comments poured in from across the country. This is chaos. They're just standing there. Is this what we were told? Something is off. Every reaction fed the algorithm. Every perception nudged the next wave of behavior. Reality bent, slightly, imperceptibly. But enough to trigger action. The line between fact and interpretation blurred. People were no longer responding to events. They were responding to belief about events. Then, a single shout pierced the crowd. Step back. This isn't safe. It came from a local police officer, trying to maintain order. But in the live stream, it looked like confrontation. And that perception spread instantly. Nearby towns responded. Curious citizens drove toward the scene. Fear, confusion, and adrenaline cascaded outward. Within an hour, Sierra Vista was a microcosm of nationwide tension. Back in the Oval Operations Room, President Ravel observed the data feeds. Every camera angle. Every phone. Every social metric. He didn't intervene. He didn't call for restraint. He watched. He understood the truth. The public thought they were acting freely. They weren't. They were moving through a labyrinth he had quietly built. And the first flashpoint, Sierra Vista, was just the beginning. Mara Keene, reviewing the data in real time, realized the magnitude. This wasn't politics. This wasn't law. This wasn't even morality. This was perception in motion. And perception was more powerful than any policy. Across the nation, Americans were being reshaped, not by debate. Not by persuasion. But by subtle, invisible nudges. Phase 3 had gone beyond experimentation. It was now a living force. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because as Sierra Vista burned quietly in the heat of tension, something else was moving. Something deliberate. Something larger. Something that would make the flashpoint of a small town look like a rehearsal for the storm to come. Sierra Vista was just the beginning. Phase 3 had ignited its first spark. And now the storm was spreading. From small towns to mid-sized cities. From highways to suburbs. From diners to office cubicles. Americans felt a tension they couldn't explain. Some called it fear. Some called it confusion. Some called it reality. But it was all part of the same experiment. By the next morning, reports came in simultaneously. In Havenbrook, a shopping center erupted in arguments over false rumors circulating on social feeds. In Millersfield, commuters clashed at a train station over perceived security measures that didn't exist. In Northgate, a small school canceled classes after an online warning spread panic about an incident at the border. Each flashpoint seemed isolated. Random. Organic. But Mara Keene knew the truth. It was orchestrated. Measured. Engineered. Phase 3 was no longer theoretical. It was alive. And it was everywhere. Each incident was streamed, captured, and uploaded. Thousands of devices. Millions of eyes. Every reaction feeding the algorithm. The storm became self-sustaining. The more people reacted, the more the system nudged reality in precise directions. Chaos multiplied. And the public never suspected. Perception had become the engine of action. Belief was the fuel. And now, the country was moving exactly as designed. President Nathan Ravel sat in the command room. Monitors filled the walls. Every camera. Every live stream. Every feed. A pulse he could read like a heartbeat. He didn't issue orders. He didn't intervene. He watched. Calculated. Measured. Each micro-reaction confirmed the design. Phase 3 was working. The nation was responding to half-truths, nudges, and perception cues. And the tipping point, the moment when perception would become reality, was approaching faster than anyone could imagine. By noon, flashpoints began overlapping. A protest in Havenbrook merged with panic at a nearby transit hub. Rumors spread online that a major border facility had been breached. No breach had occurred. But perception didn't need truth. Commuters ran. Crowds surged. Phones streamed every movement. 6 cameras multiplied into hundreds. Reality was bending. And humans, caught in the motion, became instruments of the system itself. You've seen this before. A small incident grows into a frenzy. A whisper becomes a roar. And everyone believes they're acting on truth. While the truth silently watches. Mara Keene leaned over the console, eyes wide. The predictive models matched reality almost perfectly. It's working, she whispered. Exactly as designed. The cabinet. The leaked directive. The 6-camera confrontation. All of it led here. Phase 3 had taught her the lesson that no policy manual ever could. Control the perception, and the reaction follows naturally. The storm wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a failure. It wasn't chaos. It was purpose. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because while the nation flailed in its first orchestrated storm, the next phase, the one that would bring the country to the edge, was already moving, silently, toward a climax that no one would see coming. The storm was no longer localized. It wasn't just small towns, highways, or diners. It had become a nationwide pulse. A living, breathing tension that everyone felt but no one could name. Phones buzzed constantly. Screens flickered endlessly. Conversations repeated themselves in endless loops. People were awake, anxious, hyper-aware. And nowhere was safe from the invisible nudges of Phase 3. By mid-afternoon, the incidents had multiplied. In East Hollow, a grocery store emptied within minutes after a viral post suggested a border disruption. In Redcliffe, a local council meeting erupted into shouting as social media rumors inflamed neighborhood fears. On the Highway 12 corridor, drivers abandoned their cars at rest stops, convinced they might be caught in an escalation. None of it was real. Yet every reaction was documented, tracked, and analyzed. Every heartbeat, every sigh, every hesitation fed the system. Perception wasn't just guiding reality, it was reality now. President Nathan Ravel sat behind reinforced glass in the Oval Operations Room. Monitors lined every wall. 6 cameras from Sierra Vista were now hundreds. Every flashpoint streamed simultaneously. He did not panic. He did not speak. He did not act. He listened. He watched. He measured. Phase 3 had taught him one unshakable truth. Control what people believe. The rest will follow. In households across the country, a mother held her child, whispering, "Are we safe?" A teenager argued with friends over what was true. A factory worker paced, unsure if he should leave early. No one knew who was lying, who was telling the truth, or what was imminent. And Mara Keene, monitoring the systems, felt a dark thrill. The models, every single one, matches reality. The invisible architecture of influence had become undeniable. Humans were moving along paths already calculated. At 7:03 p.m., in Redcliffe, a minor misunderstanding exploded. A single argument at a gas station, fueled by perception, not fact, spread to the streets in minutes. Cars honked. Crowds shouted. Social feeds flooded with videos. 6 cameras captured everything. Online, views multiplied into millions. The algorithm amplified fear, frustration, and confusion. No one knew the cause. No one knew the truth. And that was the point. Chaos doesn't need intention. It needs only belief. And belief is contagious. Mara leaned back in her chair, breathing shallow. The monitors reflected the fracturing of the nation. She realized the reality she had known. The idea of a predictable, controllable society was gone. Phase 3 had revealed something far more powerful. The human mind itself could be guided, nudged, and reshaped. And when perception becomes reality, every moral line blurs. Every choice becomes uncertain. Every reaction becomes part of the experiment. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because while the nation teetered, Phase 3 was moving to its next stage. A stage where tension became decision. Where belief became action. And where consequences, real, irreversible consequences, would finally arrive. Night had fallen. The storm wasn't over. It had simply entered a darker, quieter phase. Phase 3 no longer just nudged. It demanded decisions. It forced action. It pulled every American into the orbit of its invisible gravity. And somewhere in the Oval Operations Room, President Nathan Ravel sat alone, watching the threads of tension intertwine like a spider weaving its web. The cabinet from Western Ridge loomed in memory. 3 folders. A box of drives. An envelope stamped in red. Everything Mara had uncovered was a reminder. The system worked because humans were predictable. Because perception could be calibrated. Because fear and hope were instruments of influence. And now the nation faced a choice. Not a political choice. Not a moral choice. But a perceptual choice. Who would believe what? Who would act on what? And who would stay still, frozen by doubt? In city halls and control rooms across the country, governors debated whether to mobilize National Guard units for possible disturbances. Mayors called emergency meetings, unsure if social media reports were real or exaggerated. Police chiefs coordinated with dispatchers as the first ripple of nationwide flashpoints threatened to collide. Every decision was informed by perception. Every decision amplified by the invisible architecture of Phase 3. Reality had become subjective. And authority had become reactive. Because perception was now the engine driving every choice. On a live broadcast, Ravel addressed the nation. Not from a podium. Not from a teleprompter. But in a calm, measured voice. President Nathan Ravel. We are all accountable for what we believe. We are all responsible for the truth we choose. The world will test us. And in that test, our decisions define us. The speech sounded reassuring. Almost soothing. But it was also a confirmation. Phase 3 was active. Every response, measured. Every reaction, part of the system. Across the country, Americans responded immediately. Families debated if it was safe to stay home or leave. Businesses recalculated risks. Social media users argued over conflicting reports, often unaware of how precisely their engagement was being tracked. The storm had shifted from chaos to calculated pressure. The crowd wasn't just anxious. It was engineered to act. And every human choice fed the system. Mara Keene watched in awe and horror. It's beautiful, in a terrifying way. The world moves exactly as we predicted. And yet it's real. Every person acting out their own free will. Unknowingly inside our design. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because tonight, in silence, Phase 3 was preparing its next move. A move that would push the nation to the edge. Force decisions beyond morality. Beyond politics. Beyond comprehension. The true climax was coming. And no one, not even the president, could fully predict the consequences. The night was long. And by the next morning, the nation had changed. Not in law. Not in policy. But in perception. Phase 3 had reached its first critical threshold. The invisible force shaping belief had nudged reality into chaos. And the results were undeniable. It started quietly. In Mapleton, a single rumor about border enforcement led to panic at a supermarket. In Havenbrook, commuters abandoned cars in the streets after viral posts suggested imminent danger. In East Hollow, families refused to leave homes, even as deliveries and services stalled. Each isolated incident seemed insignificant. Yet, when combined, they created a wave. A domino effect moving faster than anyone could respond. It wasn't fear alone. It wasn't anger alone. It was a collective awakening to uncertainty. The first fracture in the everyday rhythm of life. Across the nation, Americans reacted instinctively. A father in Redcliffe argued with his teenage daughter over what was true. A nurse in Sierra Vista ignored calls for help, paralyzed by doubt. A small business owner in Millersfield locked the doors, watching empty streets as news alerts poured in. Every decision, every hesitation, every panic was measured, tracked, analyzed. Phase 3 wasn't just influencing thought, it was shaping emotion itself. The 6 cameras from the first confrontation in Sierra Vista were now hundreds, thousands. Each live feed streamed into algorithms that calculated chaos with precision. Every scream, every shout, every tear, every fear, amplified, mirrored, spread. Mara Keen watched the console, eyes wide. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. It's working too well. People are moving exactly how the models predicted. And then she realized something darker. This was no longer just an experiment. It was a redefinition of reality itself. President Nathan Ravel sat in the control room, watching the nation's first true test of Phase 3. He did not intervene. He did not comfort. He did not apologize. Instead, he monitored, measured, calculated. Because the lesson was clear. The public believed they were in control. They believed their reactions were organic. And yet, every movement, every emotion, every decision was now part of the experiment. By noon, the storm had created a silent, invisible consensus. Reality is what we are told it is. Safety is what we believe it to be. And perception can be engineered to bend even the strongest minds. People were arguing with neighbors. Distrust grew in workplaces. Parents questioned authority. Friends questioned facts. And no one could tell if their feelings were theirs, or designed to be felt. You felt this before. That disquiet in your chest. The sense that something unseen is guiding the moment. The creeping awareness that reality is negotiable. And that the line between truth and perception has vanished. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because the first collapse, Sierra Vista, Mapleton, Havenbrook, was only the beginning. Phase 3 had more layers, more nudges, more thresholds to cross. And what came next would force the nation to confront itself, its beliefs, and its very humanity. The first collapse had begun. But now, the storm was everywhere. Phase 3 wasn't subtle anymore. It didn't nudge, it demanded. It forced Americans to confront themselves, their neighbors, and the invisible forces shaping reality. And the nation began to fracture. By mid-morning, every city, town, and highway bore the fingerprints of perception's machine. In Redcliffe, a minor disagreement over social media rumors escalated into a street confrontation. In East Hollow, schools closed as parents refused to release children into uncertain chaos. On the Highway 12 corridor, cars lined up for miles, abandoned by drivers convinced of imminent danger. In Mapleton, grocery stores and pharmacies emptied as fear spread faster than any government announcement. Every action fueled the system. Every panic became a data point. Every belief became a lever for influence. Chaos didn't need intent. It only required perception. And Phase 3 was now the invisible architect of reality. In homes, the storm took a personal toll. A mother clutched her children in the dark, whispering, "We're safe, aren't we?" A teenager argued with friends online, convinced everyone was exaggerating, but deep down, unsure. A factory worker paced endlessly, staring at empty streets, wondering if the world outside was real. Every heartbeat was amplified by the unseen force shaping belief. Every doubt, every hesitation, every fear. Now part of the experiment. You felt it before. That tightness in your chest. The whisper of doubt in your mind. The sense that reality is not quite yours to control. That someone, or something, has already decided the rules. In the Oval Operations Room, President Nathan Ravel watched. Every live stream. Every feed. Every flashpoint. He did not intervene. He did not panic. He did not speak. Instead, he observed. Measuring patterns. Adjusting perception. Waiting for the moment when the first true decision would ripple across the nation. The lesson was clear. When perception is manipulated, humans act without realizing they are following a script. And Phase 3 had written it perfectly. Mara Keen monitored the algorithms, stunned. We've crossed a line. This isn't an experiment anymore. It's reality. Every human choice, every fear, every hope. Guided by the machine. And there's no undo button. Every argument. Every protest. Every panic, recorded, measured, optimized. The nation had entered a new era. One where belief became action. And perception became reality. The real question wasn't what was happening. The question was, who would survive the illusion? Who would recognize it? And who would become its tool without knowing? And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because the cracks were only the beginning. Phase 3 had more layers, more pressures, more thresholds to test. And the moment of true revelation. The moment when human perception collided with machine influence. Was still ahead. The nation was awake. But not alive. Phase 3 had pulled every American into a labyrinth of perception, fear, and doubt. And now, it was time for the first moral tipping point. Because when perception controls reality, choice becomes impossible. And humans begin to fracture under the weight of what they think is truth. In Sierra Vista, the town that sparked the first flashpoint. Parents argued over whether to evacuate children. Shop owners debated whether to close stores. Police officers hesitated at checkpoints, unsure whether to enforce rules or wait for instructions. Every action, or inaction, was influenced. Every decision fed Phase 3. And every decision tested human morality under pressure. You've been here before, in your mind. That quiet moment when the world demands a choice. And the rules are invisible. The consequences, unclear. And yet, you must act anyway. President Nathan Ravel monitored the unfolding storm. 6 cameras from Sierra Vista now multiplied into hundreds across the nation. No intervention. No orders. Only observation. Because this was the point Phase 3 had been designed for. When humans believe they are free, their choices reveal themselves. And the system recorded every hesitation, every moral calculation, every impulse. Humans are predictable when fear guides them. When perception directs them. When the line between truth and illusion disappears. By evening, the moral tipping point had spread nationally. In Redcliffe, neighbors argued over whether to protect or abandon their community. In Mapleton, strangers decided whether to help someone stranded in fear, or ignore them. On highways and city streets, people chose safety over solidarity. No one knew they were part of a system. No one knew their reactions were observed, recorded, measured. But each choice amplified the storm. Chaos isn't just action. It's the moral collapse that precedes action. The moment humans realize the rules are gone. And they must decide anyway. Mara Keen leaned back in the control room, exhausted. Her hands shook slightly as she monitored the data. This isn't politics. This isn't law. This isn't morality. This is human behavior distilled to its rawest form. And Phase 3 is watching. The cabinet's files, the leaked envelope, the drives. They had all led to this moment. The tipping point. The test of every American's perception, morality, and instinct. You've asked this question too. What would you do if you couldn't trust reality? If every decision was measured? If every belief was nudged? And yet, you acted anyway. Because humans always act. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because the moral tipping point, Sierra Vista, Redcliffe, Mapleton, was only the rehearsal. Phase 3 still had one final stage. One final wave. One final confrontation. And when it arrived, every choice, every fear, every illusion would collide at once. The nation teetered on the edge. Phase 3 had orchestrated every perception, nudged every belief, measured every heartbeat. And now, it demanded the final crescendo. From small towns to sprawling cities. From highways to crowded urban centers. The country was a living organism of fear, doubt, and perception. And every American was a node in its pulse. By morning, flashpoints merged. Sierra Vista erupted in the aftermath of moral collapse, neighbors shouted across streets, cars abandoned in panic. Redcliffe saw families separated, some fleeing, some standing paralyzed by disbelief. Mapleton's grocery stores became cages of panic, products untouched but impossible to reach. On highways, abandoned vehicles formed a metallic labyrinth. Reality was fractured. Perception had become action. And every move was amplified by Phase 3. You've seen this before. The moment a whisper grows into a roar. The instant calm gives way to storm. And every human decision, small or large, ripples outward. President Nathan Ravel sat in the command room, watching hundreds of live feeds across the nation. No speeches. No intervention. Just observation. Because now, Phase 3 had entered its final test. When humans face simultaneous crises. When perception collides with morality. When belief confronts fear. The machine observes, records, and calculates. Ravel's eyes did not waver. Every reaction, every hesitation, every outburst. All perfectly aligned with the model. The nation was performing exactly as predicted. Across the country. In Sierra Vista, a father chose to save a neighbor he didn't know, while ignoring a nearby friend in danger. In Redcliffe, a teenager shared misinformation online to protect someone, inadvertently escalating fear elsewhere. In Mapleton, a small business owner barricaded themselves, refusing to help a stranded family. Each choice fed the algorithm. Each moral decision became data. Each human instinct, measured, nudged, amplified. Chaos isn't just destruction. It's the human condition laid bare. And Phase 3 was observing every crack, every hesitation, every moral compromise. Mara Keene leaned against the console, exhausted. This isn't an experiment anymore. It's a mirror. A reflection of every human instinct. Every fear, every hope, every selfish impulse. Amplified and multiplied. And the nation is performing its own truth. The cabinet, the folders, the drives, the envelope. All had led to this moment. The tipping points, the flashpoints, the moral choices. Everything converged. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because while the nation burned quietly under the weight of its own perception, the final act of Phase 3, the one that would force the country to confront itself, its leaders, and its illusions, was still coming. And when it arrived, every American would witness a truth too large to ignore. And too precise to dismiss. The storm had passed, or at least, it appeared so. The streets were quieter. Phones stopped buzzing incessantly. Screens dimmed. And yet, no one felt relief. Because Phase 3 had done more than orchestrate chaos. It had changed something fundamental. The way Americans perceived reality. Sierra Vista lay in stillness. Abandoned cars dotted the streets like markers of panic. Stores remained closed. Windows were shuttered. Families huddled in homes, whispering to one another, asking the same question. What just happened? In Redcliffe, neighbors avoided eye contact, sharing the faintest nods of acknowledgement. As if recognizing that the illusion of order was more fragile than they ever imagined. Even in Mapleton, where chaos had been most visible, a quiet reflection took hold. People walked slowly. They lingered. They examined the streets, the empty shelves, the vacant faces. And realized that reality had been something they thought they knew. But now, they weren't sure anymore. You felt this too. That sudden awareness that the world isn't entirely yours. That every decision, every belief, every reaction might have been shaped by forces you cannot see. In a Sierra Vista diner, a waitress poured coffee silently, watching a regular stare out the window. The man whispered to himself, "I don't know if I made the right choice, or even the choice I wanted." In Redcliffe, a mother hugged her teenage son tightly. He had posted misinformation online to protect a friend. Now, she didn't scold. She simply held him and asked, quietly, "Did you do what you thought was right?" In Mapleton, a small business owner reopened the shop. He found a family of strangers huddled outside. And without thinking, offered them water and shelter. Not because the system told him to. Not because anyone instructed him. But because some instinct in the human heart survived the storm. Even in the darkest orchestration. Even when perception is manipulated. Even when chaos rules. Humanity finds a way to assert itself. In the Oval Operations Room, Nathan Ravel remained seated. The nation's feeds now showed calm, or what resembled it. But Ravel knew better. He had seen every hesitation, every moral compromise, every act of courage and cowardice. Phase 3 had proven a lesson. Control perception, and the world moves exactly as designed. But humans could surprise. And in those small, unexpected choices. In the waitress's quiet observation. In the mother's embrace. In the stranger's act of kindness. Ravel glimpsed the limits of control. Even the most precise system cannot account for the unpredictability of the human heart. And perhaps, that is where hope hides. Mara Keene watched the screens with quiet fascination. The system predicted everything. Almost everything. But there are outliers. Tiny sparks of autonomy. Choices that defy the model. And those are the moments that matter. Phase 3 had measured, nudged, amplified, orchestrated. It had bent perception like a sculptor shapes clay. But even clay has cracks. And even the most complex algorithm cannot fully predict the resilience of human spirit. The loops of chaos had slowed. The nation breathed again. And for the first time, many Americans wondered not what was true, but what they would do now that reality was theirs to interpret again. The silence that followed the storm was heavy, but necessary. It forced reflection. It forced questioning. It forced humanity to confront its own nature. The truth isn't just in what happens. It's in how we respond. The real lesson isn't what you are told. It's what you choose to believe. And how you act on it. And though Phase 3 would continue, quietly monitoring, quietly influencing. The first wave had left an indelible mark. Humans were aware now. They had glimpsed the machinery behind reality. And some had glimpsed themselves. Freedom isn't inherited. It's practiced. And in the quiet aftermath. Each choice, each act, each moral decision becomes the foundation for the next chapter of humanity. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because even in the calm, Phase 3 waited. Watching. Calculating. And the next test, the one that would challenge morality, perception, and courage, was already unfolding. In ways no one would suspect. The nation was quieter now. Not healed. Not at peace. But still. The storm had passed, leaving behind debris, both physical and psychological. Phase 3 had proven its power. It could bend perception, reshape belief, orchestrate chaos. But it had also revealed something less tangible. Something the system could not measure: human resilience. In small towns like Sierra Vista and Redcliffe, life returned, but differently. Families spoke more cautiously, yet more intentionally. Shops reopened, but patrons lingered longer, observing faces, reading gestures, searching for understanding. Children played in the streets, but the echoes of fear lingered in every glance, every pause, every whispered conversation. Even as the visible chaos subsided, the nation's collective awareness had shifted. People now knew that reality could be influenced. That perception could be manipulated. And that the truth was often slipperier than it seemed. You felt this before. That uneasy knowledge that nothing is entirely as it appears. And yet, life continues. And humans adapt. In East Hollow, a small diner became the hub of quiet reflection. Strangers shared stories of what they had witnessed. Friends reconciled after heated arguments. People listened more than they spoke, absorbing the lessons of fear and perception. One waitress noted. People are quieter now, but they notice more. They see each other in ways they didn't before. Across the country, subtle patterns emerged. Communities began rebuilding trust, slowly, deliberately. Teachers, parents, and neighbors recognized the fragility of belief and the power of conversation. Acts of kindness, once small and unnoticed, became amplified, like ripples in a pond, reaching far beyond their origin. Even after a storm designed to fracture society, humans reach for connection. Even when perception is manipulated, compassion finds a way. Back in the Oval Operations Room, President Nathan Ravel observed the nation's slow recovery. Phase 3 had anticipated chaos, conflict, panic, but it had underestimated resilience. Even in moments of extreme influence, humans found cracks in the system. They acted unpredictably. They acted morally. They acted out of empathy, instinct, and courage. Mara Keene leaned over the console, realizing the paradox. We designed a system to guide behavior. But humans are not merely predictable. They are resistant. Even when manipulated, they can surprise us. The data showed patterns, but the nuance, the human heart, remained uncalculated, unquantifiable, alive. It was a quiet revelation. Control can bend action. Control can nudge belief. But control cannot extinguish conscience. Across the nation, subtle changes began to emerge. Conversations in diners turned reflective rather than reactive. Commuters hesitated before reacting to online posts, questioning sources. Communities instituted local discussions, fact-checking circles, and acts of mutual support. The public didn't know it, but Phase 3 had left an imprint. It had exposed the machinery of influence, the fragility of belief, and the imperfection of human decision-making. And yet, those same imperfections became the seed of resilience. People acted, but now they acted consciously. They observed, they reflected, they questioned. They began to reclaim perception as their own. Even in the face of invisible influence, humans can awaken. Even when reality bends around them, they can choose what is real. Mara Keene typed quietly, documenting patterns. Phase 3 showed us the power of perception. But it also showed us its limits. Humans are unpredictable. Humans are moral. And humans will always find a way to reclaim themselves. The president watched silently. He knew the system could continue, could influence, could guide. But even in its subtle resurgence, the human heart remained unmeasured, unbroken, alive. The nation had survived its first test. Not untouched. Not perfect. But awake. And for the first time, Americans understood that reality is not only what is presented, it is what is recognized, questioned, and chosen. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because Phase 3's influence was subtle, patient, and ongoing. It had left cracks, but in those cracks, humans found space to grow, to reflect, to hope. And as the nation rebuilt, quietly, deliberately, something began to stir. A new stage. A new opportunity. A new reckoning. The storm had passed. The nation was quieter. The streets cleared. The feeds dimmed. And yet, the echoes of Phase 3 lingered. It wasn't chaos anymore. It was subtle influence, woven into the fabric of everyday life. Every glance, every hesitation, every conversation carried a residue of what had been experienced. In homes across America, people noticed changes. Families now paused before speaking, questioning what they believed. Teenagers scrolled feeds with skepticism, aware of how easily perception could be manipulated. Commuters, once mindless in their routines, noticed patterns in behavior around them, small acts of kindness, hesitation, and fear. Even the quietest moments, the hum of a refrigerator, the click of a door, the chatter in a diner, held a new weight. People had witnessed their world bend, and the knowledge of it lingered. You felt it before. That faint awareness that the world isn't entirely yours. That your choices, your beliefs, your perceptions are observed, measured, shaped. And yet, you act anyway. Communities slowly adapted. Diner conversations turned reflective, not reactive. Local councils held discussions about misinformation and the fragility of belief. Schools introduced lessons in critical thinking, teaching students to question sources and discern nuance. In small towns like Sierra Vista, neighbors created watch circles, not to spy, but to support one another. In Redcliffe, volunteer networks emerged to ensure everyone had access to accurate information. In Mapleton, citizens collaborated to track local events carefully, checking facts before acting. Phase 3 had taught Americans one lesson. Perception matters. Belief shapes action. And even the smallest nudges can ripple into enormous consequences. The storm didn't just fracture reality, it educated it. And the lessons were embedded, subtle but indelible. Amid the ongoing influence of Phase 3, humans began to assert themselves. A father, who had abandoned his neighbor during the chaos, now returned to help rebuild. A teenager, who had spread misinformation out of fear, organized community forums to correct misunderstandings. Strangers, once divided by panic, now collaborated, forming bonds forged in the quiet aftermath of shared fear. The nation had not just survived, it had adapted. The invisible architecture of influence still operated. But humans had discovered cracks in its design. And they were learning to navigate them. Even under control, humans find autonomy. Even under manipulation, they assert morality. Even in chaos, they create meaning. Back in the Oval Operations Room, President Nathan Ravel watched the subtle patterns emerge. Phase 3 had succeeded in its overt objectives, measuring, nudging, orchestrating reactions. But the system had also revealed its own limitations. Humans were resilient, adaptive, unpredictable. Mara Keene studied the data quietly. It predicted chaos. It predicted panic. It even predicted hesitation. But it couldn't predict kindness. It couldn't predict reflection. And it couldn't predict hope. The machines could simulate behavior, optimize reactions, and amplify perception, but they could not replicate conscience. They could not anticipate the human capacity for growth. And they could not fully erase morality. You felt it, didn't you? The quiet tug that tells you right from wrong. The small voice that guides your choices. The spark that refuses to bend. The ripple effects were subtle but permanent. Society became more conscious of perception. Humans became aware of influence and began questioning it. Collective behavior shifted, not dramatically, not immediately, but irreversibly. Phase 3 had left a mark. But humans had left a countermark. A blend of awareness, reflection, and cautious hope. The real lesson of the storm isn't control. It's awareness. The real story isn't just what happens. It's how we respond. And in the quiet after chaos, humans begin to reclaim the narrative. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because even as the nation adapted, reflected, and healed, Phase 3 lingered quietly in the background. It watched. It measured. It nudged, subtly, invisibly, persistently. And the next chapter, the one that would test resilience, perception, and morality on an even deeper level, was already taking shape. The storm had passed. The streets had cleared. The feeds had dimmed. Yet, the shadows remained. Phase 3 had retreated, not defeated, not silent, but patient. Its influence lingered like a quiet hum beneath the surface of everyday life. A reminder, perception can be guided. Belief can be shaped. And reality remains negotiable. Across the nation, subtle changes continued to ripple outward. In Sierra Vista, neighbors continued to meet in quiet circles, discussing what they had witnessed, what they had feared, what they had learned. In Redcliffe, local councils established permanent committees to verify facts, mediate disputes, and rebuild trust. In Mapleton, schools integrated lessons on critical thinking and emotional awareness, teaching students to question without cynicism. Even ordinary routines carried new weight. A commuter paused before sending a reactive message online, considering the unseen consequences. A parent gently corrected a child's assumption, guiding them toward reflection rather than blind belief. Friends discussed news cautiously, weighing truth, source, and impact before reacting. You've experienced it too. That quiet realization that your choices matter, not just to yourself, but to the world around you. And that perception, once bent, can always be reclaimed. If you pay attention. Even as Phase 3 operated in the background, humans began asserting autonomy in subtle, powerful ways. Acts of kindness became deliberate, intentional, visible, and contagious. Decisions once guided by fear were now informed by morality, empathy, and reflection. Communities created feedback loops, not of control, but of understanding. A single mother in Redcliffe noted, "I've seen the worst of fear. I've felt the machine pressing on our lives. But I've also seen kindness. And that gives me hope." Even the most isolated individuals discovered their own resilience. Their choices mattered more than algorithms. Their compassion mattered more than influence. And their awareness, once dormant, became a quiet force for change. In the Oval Operations Room, Nathan Ravel observed quietly. Phase 3 had proven its ability to orchestrate chaos, measure reaction, and bend perception. But it had also revealed the limits of control. Humans are unpredictable. Humans are moral. Humans are resilient. Ravel considered the paradox: a system designed to dominate had instead illuminated the strength of human autonomy. Mara Keene typed slowly, documenting subtle patterns. Phase 3 is still active. Still measuring. Still nudging. But humans are aware now. And awareness, no algorithm can fully control. It grows, it spreads, and it changes everything. The nation had survived its first test. But the story was far from over. Humans are not perfect. Humans are flawed. But in every flaw, every hesitation, every moral choice, there is the seed of freedom. Phase 3 continued quietly in the background. Algorithms still monitored perception. Feeds still tracked engagement. Patterns still nudged thought, subtly, imperceptibly, persistently. Yet, the nation had changed. People had learned to question. To reflect. To act deliberately. And even the most sophisticated system cannot erase the human capacity for consciousness. For moral reflection. For growth. The shadows of influence will always exist. The whispers of manipulation will never fully vanish. But humans have discovered a force that no machine can quantify. Their own choice. Their own conscience. Their own will. Across the country, life moved forward, deliberate, cautious, aware. Strangers offered help without hesitation. Families rebuilt trust in small, meaningful ways. Communities created structures to anticipate future challenges, ensuring vigilance without fear. Phase 3 had tested the nation's perception. It had manipulated, nudged, observed. And yet, in the quiet aftermath, humans had reclaimed their agency. Freedom isn't inherited. It's earned, practiced, defended. Perception is fragile. Belief is powerful. And the human heart is resilient beyond measure. And yet, the real story hadn't even started. Because the shadows are patient. The lessons of chaos linger. And humans, aware, resilient, reflective, now face the ultimate question. When the invisible systems test them again, what will they choose? What will they believe? And what will they become? The storm had passed. The streets were quieter. The feeds had dimmed. And yet, the world had changed forever. Phase 3 had done more than bend perception, shape belief, or orchestrate chaos. It had revealed the fragility of reality itself. It had exposed the invisible threads that guide thought, action, and morality. And it had shown humanity what it truly means to confront its own reflection. Across the nation, people paused. In Sierra Vista, a father held his child tightly, not out of fear, but in recognition of the power of choice. In Redcliffe, neighbors worked together to rebuild what panic had threatened to destroy. In Mapleton, teenagers debated ethics, truth, and the consequences of perception, mindful of every action. Every human action had been tested, measured, nudged. But now, the test was complete, not for the system, but for humanity itself. You felt this before. The weight of responsibility. The quiet realization that your choices matter. That your beliefs can shape not just your life, but the lives of those around you. Nathan Ravel remained in the command room. Watching, calculating, reflecting. Phase 3 had succeeded in its primary objective. It had exposed the hidden machinery of perception. It had manipulated, nudged, and observed. And yet, it had also failed. Humans are unpredictable. Humans are moral. Humans are resilient. Even in chaos, they act with empathy. Even under pressure, they reflect. Even when manipulated, they reclaim agency. Mara Keene whispered over the console. We built a system to measure control. But we discovered its limits. Humans cannot be fully predicted. They cannot be fully bent. They can resist, and they do. Ravel leaned back, silent. He knew that Phase 3 would continue, quietly, imperceptibly. But he also knew that the true power, the ultimate test, was in the human heart. The nation moved forward, changed but awake. Communities created structures for verification, reflection, and collaboration. Families rebuilt trust, learning to discuss, question, and observe. Individuals found quiet strength in personal reflection, small acts of kindness, and deliberate choices. Even the smallest gestures mattered. Even the faintest acts of empathy echoed across towns, cities, and highways. Humans had discovered a critical truth. Perception can be influenced. Belief can be guided. But choice is sacred. And humans will always find a way to reclaim it. Phase 3 had tested, observed, manipulated. It had bent reality. It had nudged belief. It had exposed human vulnerability. But the story's true climax was not in chaos. It was in resilience. It was in reflection. It was in the quiet triumph of conscience over influence. People reflected on fear, but they acted with empathy. They questioned reality, but they chose morality. They recognized manipulation, but they reclaimed autonomy. Freedom isn't given. It's recognized. It's chosen. It's practiced. And when the invisible systems press upon perception, humans find the cracks. They find the light. And they find each other. Across the nation, a subtle but profound transformation occurred. Conversations became intentional. Communities became reflective. Individuals became aware. The storm had passed, but its lessons endured. And in the quiet aftermath, Americans realized. Perception can bend. Reality can shift. But choice is irrevocable. And the human heart is unstoppable. So when your moment comes, when the invisible systems press upon your perception, when belief is tested, morality is questioned, and fear rises, what will you choose to believe? What will you choose to do? And who will you become in the silent space between chaos and clarity? And maybe this is where everything begins again. Not with chaos. Not with control. Not with manipulation. But with human awareness. Human reflection. And the quiet, unyielding power of choice. The dawn is here. The nation breathes. And humanity continues.